Hello and welcome to Tech Deals Graphics Card Performance Comparison. Today we are testing 4 different graphics cards, the GTX 670, 770, 970, and 1070. You can see all 4 of them at the same time. I'm doing something new. Each of these were tested at 1080p resolution Full HD, but I'm rendering and uploading this video at 4K. Since 4K resolution is exactly 4 times 1080p, I can upload these in a square format. i7 7700K, 5 GHz fixed, 16 gigs of RAM, DDR4 3200 MHz, and as I said, these are tested at 1080p resolution. Now today we're playing Grand Theft Auto 5. Grand Theft Auto 5 is CPU intensive, and this is a very important point, especially when we look at the results for that GTX 1070 at the end of this. But first of all, we're going to start off with the graphics cards themselves. Take a look at the usage of each graphics card. It is the first percentage on the first line of each run. Now on the 670, 770, and 970, we are basically at 99 or 98% usage. But on the 1070, we're not. Very important point. Notice at the moment we're only at about 75, 72, there's 77% usage. The GTX 1070 is bottlenecked at 1080p in Grand Theft Auto 5 at very high detail. The fact of the matter is the CPU cannot actually keep up with the GTX 1070. If you had a 1080 or a 1080 Ti, it would be exactly the same performance. This game will run no faster. That is because GTA 5 is very CPU dependent and because high frame rates are very CPU bound. Now please note we are testing at 1080p to keep the same parameters so the older cards will function. If we were playing at 4K, for example, there was no way in the world the 670 or the 770 would be useful. If you have a GTX 1070, raise the resolution up to 1440p and this will change. You will see your graphics card utilization jump up. You will see the CPU utilization drop down. But of course you will see the frame rate drop down. Basically, a 5 GHz i7 7700K is not going to run this game much faster than about 150 frames per second no matter what you do or what graphics card you put in it, simply due to the fact that it is very, very CPU bound. Now, the preceding statement is not true of most games. Ghost Recon Wildland, The Division, Assassin's Creed Syndicate are far less CPU bound than this is. They are CPU dependent, and certainly if you want high refresh rates, if you want over 100 frames per second, you need lots of CPU power. But Grand Theft Auto 5 is sort of unique in that it is a good AAA game that is incredibly CPU dependent. Now still, there is a huge variation in frame rate here. We are in fact running at very high detail, full screen anti-aliasing is turned on, and so there's still a noticeable performance difference. We are over 60 frames per second on the 4-plus-year-old GTX 670, and I really think that speaks to both the optimization of this game and to how good even 4-year-old graphics cards really can be. Now, again, I've tested other games on these cards. Go check out that link in the description below if you'd like to see some perhaps newer games. Grand Theft Auto 5 is about a year and a half old on the PC at this point. It's almost 3 years old if you consider the console versions, although they did a lot of optimization work to make it work very well on the PC. The PC version has higher details and some other optimizations. They did a really good job with it, in my opinion. Just be aware that to a far greater extent than any of the other games that I've done this type of test with, this game really cares about your CPU. For example, I've tested Grand Theft Auto 5 as well as Ghost Recon Wildlands on older CPUs, 2nd and 4th gen. Those show a much larger difference between CPU generations than, say, Ghost Recon Wildland does. Furthermore, i5s or i3s as well as, say, the AMD FX processors really struggle with GTA 5, where they actually do pretty well in most titles that are not so CPU dependent. I really want to make that point because when you watch these benchmarks, I'm doing live gameplay for a very important reason. It's to see the real-time numbers when stuff is actually happening on the screen. Now, inevitably, somebody always asks, why don't you just run the game's built-in benchmark? After all, it has a benchmark. What are we looking at live gameplay for? I have tested this game extensively. I must have 40 plus videos about GTA 5 on my channel. I haven't counted recently, but there's a lot of them. And in all of my testing across CPUs and graphics cards, I have discovered that those built-in benchmarks rarely tell the tale when it comes to how playable is a game. A game can have great frame rates in the built-in benchmark, but stutter or have input lag when you're actually playing the game. One of the questions is not how well is the frame rate, but it's how well does the game actually play? In other words, when you press the W key to move forward, does the game respond instantly, or is there that hesitation of lag before something happens? If you're playing GTA 5 on, say, an older CPU or one with a much lower clock speed, then you may very well find that you get that input lag no matter what graphics card you put into your machine. And thus, by actually playing the game, I can tell you, yes, it's playable here, or no, it's not. Yes, there's great performance, or no, there's not. Now let me tell you, all of these were excellent and totally playable. If you have a 70 series card from the last 4 generations from NVIDIA, even the GTX 670, and you're okay to play at 1080p, and you have a great CPU, yes, Grand Theft Auto 5 is great. There is no need whatsoever to upgrade your graphics card if this is the only game you play at 1080p. I did put serious consideration into actually running these at 1440p. I didn't for a couple of reasons. For one thing, the VRAM on the 2GB cards is not enough. It'll do it, but then you start getting artificially limited by the fact that they're 2GB cards instead of 4GB cards. And when you're running very high detail at 1440p with 3.6 million instead of 2 million pixels, more VRAM really starts to make a difference. If you have a 3 or 4-year-old graphics card, playing at 1440p is probably not realistic in games like GTA 5, Ghost Recon, Mass Effect Andromeda, etc. But this video series is not just made to say, go out and buy the latest shiny graphics card. It's also made to say, hey, maybe you don't need to. And in this particular video, I want to emphasize the fact that you can in fact play many games. Not all. There are some games that really don't play great on these older cards, but some games do. And so if you have one of these older cards, there are many, many games you play, and you don't necessarily need to go out and buy something brand new just because there's a new shiny out. And with that being said, let's take a look at the results. The green bars are the average frame rate, the red bars are the 1% minimum, and the blue bars are the 0.1% minimum. Averages first. 67 frames per second in actual gameplay on a 4-year-old GTX 670, 84 frames per second on the 770, a whopping 122 frames per second on the 970, and 141 frames per second on the 1070. Now, if you skipped ahead and you're wondering why the 970 and 1070 are so close, go back and watch some of the video. I made this one pretty short for you. Essentially, the graphics card is totally bottlenecked by the CPU, and that it simply wasn't running at 100% because we're at 1080p. If I reran this with the 970 and 1070 at 1440p, you would see a much, much larger difference between those two cards. But at 1080p, a 1070 is way overkill, at least in a 1.5-year-old game like Grand Theft Auto 5. Now let's talk about those minimums for a second. Now the red bars are the ones I think you should focus on. 1% minimum. What does that mean? Essentially, instead of being a true minimum, it drops the bottom 1% of the frames and says, this is your minimum frame rate 99% of the time. Of course, normally it's way above that, as you can see from the green average bars. But what this says is this is your playable minimum. Yes, in a 10 or 20 minute run, you might have 10 or 15 frames, not seconds, frames that are down below these numbers. You're not really going to notice, and that shouldn't impact your gameplay. And so the red bars are your playability minimum. The blue bars take it a decimal place further and say 99.9% of the time. I personally think the blue bars are worth ignoring because you really get down to the last 3, 5, 10 frames in a long, long run. But I put the numbers in here because once I've calculated the first, it's easy to do the second. And, you may disagree with my opinion. But look at the red bars. In my opinion, 48, 59, 91, and 101 is much more reflective of the minimum playable frame rate. As you can see here, even a 3.5-year-old GTX 770 has a basically 60 frame per second minimum playable frame rate at very high detail with anti-aliasing turned on Grand Theft Auto 5. Now, if you have a 670, what can you do to get those minimums up to 60? Easy. Set it to high detail instead of very high, or turn anti-aliasing off if you want, your choice. Many of the other videos I've done on these 4 cards have demonstrated how unplayable some new current games are on these older cards, but I include this one because I don't want these videos to just be about, hey, quick, go buy the new shiny graphics card because it's better. Well, sure, it is better, it is faster, and if you wanted to play GTA 5 at 4K, that 1070 would be a virtual requirement. The 970 is not going to do it. But if you're a 1080p gamer, your 670 or 770 still will play many current games on the market. You don't have to upgrade just yet. Well, at least not for this game. Now, just a quick side note for those of you curious, I do have on the shelf a GTX 660, a 760, a 960, and of course a 1060. I will be doing the same video series again on those 4 cards. It will not be right away. It may not be for a couple of weeks because there's a bunch of launches of hardware coming up soon that I need to cover. I need to get some build videos done. But in about a month or so, I'm going to circle back around and retest everything on this playlist on those 60 series cards. And then, of course, I'll include these numbers as well, so you don't have to come back and reference the videos if you don't want to. Will a GTX 660 still run GTA 5 at very high detail at 1080p? No, it won't. Spoiler alert, I can tell you that already, but it may very well be playable at high detail. We'll have to take a look at that when I circle back around. I hope this video was helpful and useful to you. Click that like button, share this video with your friends. Remember to subscribe to my channel. Check the video description for links to everything in this video. Please consider supporting me on Patreon. Links down in the description below, if you are able to. If not, liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting is also appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next video.